everyone. I hope you are all doing well. If you don't know me, my name is Stephanie Pritchard, and I have been a faculty member in the English and Creative Writing department. I am now moving into a new role as the coordinator of the Writing Center. Today is actually my very first day. So thank you. Yeah, I'm very excited. And I will still be doing a lot of work in relation to artificial intelligence in this new role. I think it's going to be really important to keep up with that kind of stuff. So I have prepared a presentation for you all. And I mean for this to be somewhat interactive so that you don't just have to sit there and listen to me talk. I will be kind of flipping back and forth a little bit between what I've prepared and Chat GPT so that you can kind of see things in real time, which I think is really helpful. Just so that I have like kind of a reading of the Zoom room, can you like raise your hand or put in the chat like if you are somewhat familiar with generative AI like Chat GPT? So like if you are, then raise your hand. And by somewhat familiar, you know, you've used it, you've seen it used, you know, at least a little bit. Okay, awesome. Somewhat familiar. Perfect. Thank you. So I'm not going to talk very much about like, you know, Chat GPT as like an entity. Instead, I'm going to kind of just jump right in and start using it. There is a session, I've got a session after lunch that's more of like an introductory thing if this is something that you're just getting familiar with and you want to learn more about. So definitely feel free to check that out if you would like. But it seems like many of you are already quite familiar, which is wonderful. So I am going to share my screen. Like I said, I will be kind of bouncing back and forth a little bit. So hopefully that's not too irritating for anyone. Can everybody see this okay? Awesome. Thank you. So this is my contact information. If you would like, I am more than happy to share the slideshow, you know, at the end. If you would like, it's just a Google slide, so I can share the link with everyone. I can put it in the chat if that would be helpful for you, but you can tell me at the end if that would be helpful or not. So what I'm going to spend time talking about is a huge thing that's connected to using generative AI tools, which is basically like knowing how to use them well and knowing how to use them for you. And this is something, you know, I've integrated AI into many of my courses this past semester. And it turns out that while many of my students are using AI, they're not really sure how to use it like the right way or how to use it like well. So a lot of the things that I want to talk about today are how you can use generative AI like ChatGPT. That's going to be the one that I focus on for today to do a whole bunch of different things for you, which I think can make our lives a little bit easier as working professionals. So there is the phrase prompt engineering. I did want to go over this phrase right before I talk about the other things because I think that this phrase is really important. So prompt engineering is the phrase that we use when you interact with generative AI. So anytime you put in like a new chat, you are prompting the AI to do something for you or give you something. So whatever you type is how the AI understands you and then like responds to you. So the idea here is that the better your prompt, the better your response sometimes, right? So that's the kind of premise that I'm going to work on for the rest of this presentation. So knowing how to do these prompts and how to do these prompts well is called prompt engineering. And that's what we're going to kind of work through today in a couple of different ways. So I really like this series of guidelines as I am prompting generative AI for different reasons. I stole these from Dr. Danny Liu, who works at the University of Sydney. He gave a really wonderful webinar on generative AI last summer that I attended. It's been my favorite AI webinar that I've gone to so far. I would be happy to share it with you all. And he kind of talked about like how, you know, like the more specifically you can prompt generative AI, the better off you're going to be. And here are a couple of guidelines that you should follow. And I find that usually when I follow these guidelines, the results that I get from the AI are usually quite a bit better. So as you are prompt engineering, you want to tell the AI what you want it to be or what you want it to do. So, if I am an undergraduate student, then I might say, act as an undergraduate student who is taking a course in physics, right? That would be like a good way for me to begin. So the AI knows how it should sound. Then you should tell it what you need it to do for you, what the requirements of the task are. So like what the completed response needs to contain. And I've got some examples and stuff in just a moment. And then any additional instructions that the AI needs to keep in mind to act on the prompt. So like the instructions, I'll usually tell it, this should be no longer than 2 paragraphs, right? Or something like that, so that it understands about how much content I'm looking for. So I will refer back to these guidelines as we kind of go through and look at some of the prompt engineering exercises that I'm going to construct. Does that make sense so far? Does anybody have any questions for me? And does anybody have any of your own prompt engineering strategies that you have found to be particularly effective or not so far?
Hi, Stephanie. I'm Carlo. I work in the CPS department. What I found is I love this strategy. I also heard it is role, goal, and information. That's kind of my mantra. But in interacting with ChatGPT, I also see it almost like a conversation where it'll give me something back and it won't be quite what I need. So then I'll refine it from there. So if I can have that kind of dance back and forth, usually by the third or fourth iteration, I've got closer to what I want.
Thank you for that, Carla. What did you say again? Role, goal, and information?
Yeah, role, goal, and information. That was John and Rebecca had an AI specialist on the podcast, and I stole that from that person.
I love that. And it's a lot easier to remember too than the role, task, requirements, instructions thing. What you said too about kind of like going back and forth and dancing with it is like so accurate. I find, and like some of the exercises that we're going to do in just a couple minutes, I almost never get what I'm looking for in the first go, right? It always takes me a couple of kind of back and forth. So I love that you said both of those things. Thank you. Does anybody else have any kind of like reactions or things that you would like to add about your own experience with prompt engineering? Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I was just going to ask Stephanie if in your experience people talk about genre at all, because I find if you specify the form of what it is that you're looking for, it's often really helpful, even at the level of argumentation. If you ask the AI to argue, I don't think it argues well, but it tries in some ways that it won't if you don't specify. But I just wondered, do people talk about that much?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, if you're looking for it to do something specific, right? Like if you want it to argue or if you want it to persuade or if you want it to write descriptively, right? Any of those things I think are super important to clarify as you're going through here. And I mean, like for our students, right, which is a whole other conversation, sometimes I think they have a hard time using generative AI because they perhaps themselves don't fully understand what they have to do, right? Or what their intention needs to be. But for us, I think it's quite a bit easier. So I'm glad that you said that because that's a super important thing for us to keep in mind too as we go through and start doing some of these exercises. Thank you, Mike. Did anybody else have anything that you wanted to add about your own experience with prompt engineering or just general comments about anything we've talked about so far? Cool. All right. So what I have here are some of the things, and I mean, like, there's so many more, right? But I tried to keep it relatively concise. Some of the different ways that we as working professionals can use generative AI to be helpful for us. So I am not going to go through this entire list, right? We're not going to do exercises with this entire list because that would be epic. But I did pick a couple from this list. And then after we do a couple, I'll return to this and we can kind of do one together, right? Perhaps there's something in your discipline or something that you need to do in your day-to-day life that you would like to kind of work through together as we prompt ChatGPT for some of these different things. So I will tell you that probably my favorite thing to use generative AI to help me with is in regards to titling. I stink at titles. I find them really hard. I'm also really intimidated by them. So I really love to use AI to help me come up with titles for all sorts of different things. Titles for presentations, titles for different projects that I'm working on, right? So we'll kind of go through and do a couple of these, and then I'll go back through to this list and we can work through one together. But I think that we can use these tools in many of these ways. And like I said, this is not, and you know, there are many more options than what we've got on this list. So the one that I want to do first, and Mike, you will kind of chuckle at this example, I think, is how you can use generative AI to help you draft a proposal. So the proposal that I'm going to show you is drafting a proposal or an abstract for a writing conference. So this is my first prompt. I know it's bad, but I want to show you what ChatGPT does with a prompt that's kind of like more basic like this versus a prompt that's a little bit more developed. So I need help writing an abstract for a writing conference. The theme of the conference is AI. My presentation is going to be about the benefits and challenges of using AI in the classroom. Okay, I switched over. Can everybody see this? Awesome. So what I'm going to do is copy paste that prompt right into ChatGPT, and let's see what it does. Okay, I'm going to just take a moment to like be quiet so you can skim over what the AI suggested in regards to the proposal that I could submit for my conference. And I'm wondering, I was just going to ask, you guys started beating me to it, if there are reactions to what ChatGPT suggested. So feel free to either throw them in the chat, or you know, just jump in.
Well, it looks like somebody's and which Chat GPT does well, is curating a bunch of stuff that other people have proposed in conference programs and put it into a big pot and hope that something would fly. So that's where we get the we're going to do everything kind of.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think you also said, what's your first name?
Kathy.
Kathy. So Kathy, I think that you also mentioned that there are lots of like expensive words here. I love that. I think that that's a really great way to phrase this. Yeah, thank you. Other reactions.
I'd agree that it feels like a grab bag of language that's used in a kind of semi-professional sort of a context, in not even necessarily in an academic context, for conference presentations. In part, you know, maybe because of the generality of the prompt, but you know, lots of it does seem to me like a lot of, yes, expensive language that says relatively little in some way.
Yes, I absolutely agreed. And then I think Gwen mentioned, yeah, like jargon heavy, absolutely. So like just the language and the fact that it's, like it's saying so many things, right? Like there are so many words here, but the words are not actually like saying much, right? Any
But on
other
the other hand,
reactions?
this is Carlo. I think it's an
Carlo?
indication of how far we've come. I mean, it's pretty awesome that it can generate something so quickly that is not great, but it's not a bad start. And 10 years ago, if somebody had said to us through this machine that will spit out something to kind of jump off from, and that's my impression of ChatGPT is always kind of awe, at least about what can start me thinking about. It's never a finished product, but I'm still in awe of it when I see how quickly. I mean, it was 3 seconds before it generated this jargony response. But there's some there. You got to work through it though.
I agree with you. I usually like, so one of my favorite ways to use generative AI is actually for outlining. And that's something that we can look at toward the end if we have time. But you're right, like it's a great way to begin at least, like we had and I mean for my students, right, and for me also, a lot of the time, sometimes the blank page can be really intimidating, right? And like we had a blank page, and then 3 seconds later we had all these words. Are many of these words mediocre? Yeah, but there are some words here, and we could pull some stuff out of this, right? If we wanted to. Yeah, yes, I agree, Kathy, definitely. So I'm gonna go back to my slide. And I'm going to go to my second prompt. So this is still drafting a proposal, but we're going to try to make it better. And again, like it takes a lot of kind of going back and forth. So this is my second prompt. And what you want to remember every time you are working with generative AI, they are chatbots, right? So they respond and sort of like learn the more you interact with them. So when I'm talking to ChatGPT, I talk right to it, right? So this time I said, this is a good start, but not quite what I'm looking for. Here are clearer guidelines. Act as a faculty member who teaches in the English and Creative Writing department at SUNY Oswego. And you'll notice now that I've given it this information, it will integrate this information into the proposal, which is not really ideal, right? But it is interesting to see what you add and then what those additions do to the finished product. So compose an abstract that can be submitted to the SUNY Council on Writing Conference, which is an annual conference for writers, scholars, and teachers at SUNY schools. The abstract needs to discuss the benefits and challenges of using AI in higher ed, specifically in writing classes. The abstract should briefly mention that the presentation will include some hands-on exercises as well as conversation about generative AI. The abstract should be written in 1 or 2 paragraphs and should not exceed 250 words. So this part at the bottom about the length, especially, I think is very helpful to include, right? Because I've noticed, and perhaps many of you have noticed as well, if you don't give AI some sort of like parameters, it tends to get a little bit repetitive, and it tends to just do more and more and more, instead of giving you something like of quality, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy and paste this back into ChatGPT, and we're going to see what it does. Here we go. So whenever you're ready, feel free to either pop some responses in the chat or jump in and offer what you know, what are your reactions to this second time around? I absolutely agree that it is still quite general.
Yeah, it's much improved, but it's still like talking around what it's about. It doesn't have like a clear thrust to it. Like it doesn't, it's like very much beating around the bush.
Yep, absolutely. I agree. Thank you, Peter. Other reactions? Yes, Ken, I'm glad that you mentioned that. I mentioned specifically that the abstract should be 1 or 2 paragraphs, and yet there are 3 paragraphs here.
It's definitely more shapeable. Like I would go to the third paragraph about what we're promising to do and say, well, we could do that, or are we, is that feasible in a 50-minute session or whatever the case is? Um, and I would start from there rather than all the quote BS early in the first 2 paragraphs. So I think there is some meat to pull from this version.
And Stephanie, I wonder if you prompted it again to either write at a specific grade level, because it's still filled with jargon. I'm wondering if you asked it to limit the jargon or write at, I know it's obviously audience dependent, but if you ran a readability on this, it would come out at, 18th grade or whatever. And so if you asked it to write at a lower grade level, what would the product look like?
Kathy, I was going to say, with respect to the sentence that you were pointing out, I think it's interesting that it says something about the formulaic nature of our conferences, that it assumes that we'll do that.
So how about this?
Somebody did it somewhere, sometime in the past, and so it's now part of this formula.
All right, so I said, this is much better, but too full of jargon. Can you make this more approachable? I especially like the 3rd paragraph. Can you rewrite just that paragraph and be more specific about the hands-on exercises? See what it does. And then we'll move on after this. The session will be like a creative playground. What? That was... I can actively feel my students laughing at this.
Hey, Stephanie, can I ask you a question? Could we do one more prompt? Could we ask it, could we give it a position? Like, could we say, make this argument or point? Like, one of the, and partly I'm wondering, one of the things that my students noticed when they played around with AI was that they could not get it to say anything negative about AI.
Yeah. So perhaps ask it, this response is not I am looking for.
Although it does earlier in one of the responses talk about potential biases and ethical considerations.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm. What's interesting is that even when talking about the the negatives, there's still words like pals, our new tech pals, to still help it sound friendly,
Yes.
That's
All
how
right,
that's how it's reducing jargon, is by trying to put those non-jargon, so instead of connections, pals, that kind of thing.
I agree. Yeah. All right, let's abandon this one for now and go into the second example. All right, so I am not good at making rubrics because I tend to not use them very much. But I know that there are some people who are very good at doing rubrics. But I did play around with rubrics in generative AI, and I found it to be quite helpful because this is something that I personally have a very hard time with. So this is something that I've done before. I actually modified the rubric that it created for me for this assignment and ended up using it because I found it to be really, really helpful. So this is what I'm going to prompt the AI with this time around. So this is our second activity. So please create a grading rubric for the following find and share assignment for a college level spoken word poetry class. Here is the assignment. So this is what I gave to my students. They have to find a poem that connects to the subject matter we're exploring. Button Poetry is a wonderful resource for locating contemporary spoken word poems. And then after my students find a poem, they have to type up a brief statement that summarizes the poem, how they understand the poem, why they chose to share it, and they have to include one quote from the poem that they found to be really impactful. And then they come to class and they share their poem with the class and kind of talk about why they picked it, right? This is an assignment that I give like I said, my first year signature course. So this is a class that's full of only freshmen. And it's kind of a good way. It's a spoken word class. So the whole point of the course is for them to get comfortable coming up in front of the room and like talking about stuff. So this is the assignment, and I wanted the AI to make a rubric for me. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to copy and paste it into ChatGPT and see what it does. So I'm going to make a new chat up here, which I find to be very helpful when I'm switching from one thing to another, right? So, and then I'm going to copy and paste this in here, and let's see what it does. Could anyone who's here as this is working, if you use rubrics frequently, could you mention that in the chat just so I know if there are people here who do this a lot? Okay. Okay, awesome. So I'm going to scroll up just a little bit. Yes, but never used ChatGPT. Okay, and then this is what it came up with. So it has the relevance of the chosen poem, and then talks about the 3 levels: clarity and depth, engagement in class discussion, and that's the whole thing. Give everybody a moment to skim and then give me some reactions. Point totals and any criteria I've come up with. Does anyone feel as though this is a good rubric or mediocre or terrible?
I think it's a good baseline, but it's not clear to me what constitutes deep understanding or insightful or active participation, or they seem to be using words that are rather vague. And now that I look at it, it's not clear what those words really mean.
I
It
think
seems
that's a great observation, Lynn. Thank you. Go ahead, Peter. I'm sorry.
Oh no, it's fine. I'm sorry. It seems to also like have multiple criteria under each section, which is generally frowned upon because when you mark it, the student isn't sure which of those criteria were the problem based on how it's marked. And so splitting those out tends to be better.
Okay, yeah. So like you mean like under, if we're looking at number 1, the relevance of the chosen poem, if we're looking at limited, like you're suggesting that like the fact that limited is the poem lacks clear relevance to themes and the student's explanation is vague or insufficient. Like, is that what you were talking about when you said like multiple criteria? Oh, I think you're muted.
Yeah, there we go. If we look at the exceptional prompt, it says like the relevance to the subject matter, the relevance to the class themes, and the student's ability to articulate that. And I would split those into 3 things. Like, what is the relevance to the subject matter? How good is that? What is the relevance to the class themes? How well are you articulating that relevance? I feel like those are 3 separate things. Whereas, and if you mark those as 3 separate things, I think students tend to react. It's more clear for them where they had a problem. Yeah.
Excellent. So there's too much kind of like being like compacted into the same category for one of the grading criteria. Thank you. Yes, Ken, you are absolutely right that there were explicit requirements for a quote. So what if we look and reprompt it and ask it about formatting only before we go into something else? So this is really interesting. So it's like when I put this in, it can spit out like several possibilities, right? So like you never know what you're going to get. So this one I actually haven't seen before in regard to a grading rubric that it kind of like gave me. And it makes it much more concise, but also quite a bit more vague, right? I feel like the first one, although still vague, had more detail in it than this one did. So what if we regenerate it again and see what it does again? Interesting. Okay. So how about we do something like this to reprompt it again? Can you make the exceptional? So what if we ask it, if I kind of go off of Peter's observation, right, about how the exceptional had too much going on, right? Can you make it more specific? I find it vague the way you've worded it. Holy cow. So now we have the chosen poem aligns seamlessly with current class themes, showcasing a profound understanding of the subject matter. The student provides a clear and insightful explanation, demonstrating how the poem enriches and deepens the exploration of the course content. Does anyone have reactions to the new language?
It reminds me of that scene in Dead Poet Society. I don't know if anyone's seen that movie where Robin Williams is talking to the students about how to rate poetry. And he's referencing a textbook that has this very complicated way of looking at the quality and the emotion. And he says, Robin Williams said, excrement. It kind of just looks like they threw a bunch of stuff against the wall.
For the newbie rubric constructor, this gives you great non-examples so that you can perfect your trade. How's that for cup is half full? So it does give you, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw published rubrics that had global constructs like this in there, which confuses students like anything, like Peter is saying. And yet the examples themselves prompt us to make it better. So that's, I mean,
I agree with you. Looking at even just having a bunch, like for someone like me, right, who doesn't, I teach writing, so I don't use very many rubrics. I give lots of written feedback instead. So for someone like me, just to see a couple of examples or then to re-prompt it, you know, and say something like, okay, you know, can you rework the clarity and depth of brief statement section, you know, and just see kind of like how it restructures it, right, to give me some additional ideas as I'm composing my own rubrics, right? I don't know, I find that when, especially when you first begin teaching, you know, you have some resources available to you, but you have to go find many of them as well, right? So for me anyway, right, like if I were doing this as a new teacher, I would be able to see a whole bunch of examples and then hopefully be able to decide how I can make them better, right? Or how I can make them work for me. I've had it also go through and like instead of doing like this list, can you make a rubric like a chart? I think is how. Oh, but not this chart. It went through and like kind of did it like in a more traditional kind of chart. It didn't do like this black background and stuff, but it went through and did it like more like a, you know, like as I was growing up, like a traditional rubric, right, would look like. And it would go through and kind of organize it that way too, which for me, like visually, I could understand a little bit better, right? So you can ask it to do a few different things in regard to how things are set up, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. Yes, definitely. All right. So this is the last guided exercise that I'm going to do. And then if we have time, then I'll go back to that previous list and we can pick something else and work through one together. So for me, as someone who teaches mostly creative writing, but also composition, I am always looking for more ideas in regards to in-class activities and things that I can do with my students. So one of the things that I like to do, right, is at the beginning of every class, we'll do like some sort of like informal writing assignment. For me, I find that helps my students kind of get settled into the classroom, kind of get their heads in the right spaces, you know, like whatever else. 10 minutes or less, right, of just writing in a notebook. And all of these informal writing assignments are connected to whatever assignment we're currently working on. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to tell the generative AI to act as an expert in poetry writing. And then I'm going to ask it to create 5 different informal writing prompts that connect to the following assignment. So in my introductory poetry writing class, I themed the whole class. It was themed before, so they had to write poems that were related to this idea. So one of the poems that they had to write was called Before the Breakup. So I was looking for different writing prompts that we can do in class that would help my students understand how to approach this topic right before the breakup. And their breakup could be about a romantic relationship, an ending to a friendship, something that never got started, right? And then every writing prompt I want the generative AI to create should help my students approach this idea in a different way. And then I say to it, right, as part of the instructions, every prompt should be able to be completed during the class time that I allow. They have less than 10 minutes to create each prompt or to complete each prompt. So I'm going to take this and put it into the AI and see what it does. So some of these I think are garbage, but a couple of them I think have some real potential. Like, for example, and again, right, like it's creative writing. So, you know, I love the write a poem in the form of an unsent letter or a message, right? I mean, I think that that could be a really, really wonderful one for my students to kind of use to brainstorm for. And again, this is all meant to be brainstorming, right? For what could turn into something else. They get worse as they go along. Did anybody think that any of the other ones are worth it?
Since I've said they get worse as they go along, I like number 1 and number 2 best. You know, you mentioned the unsent letters, but I like the snapshot too. I totally dislike the metaphorical journey.
Yeah.
Where I thought it was getting desperate.
Yeah.
I think like number 4 isn't too bad. Like that, like, I don't know, getting students to practice writing in different voices is important. I feel like it could be a good exercise.
I don't hate the memory collage either, honestly, because I think that would give my students an opportunity to work on small pieces of information and like do a list, right? They could do like a list poem, kind of all these different memories or these different moments. So, let's say then, right, that like we like one, right? Let's pick like maybe number 1, right? The vivid snapshot of a moment before the breakup. So sometimes I don't do this all the time because I don't want my students to feel, you know, like I like models a lot, but I also don't want them to feel like they have to do the same thing as the model, right? But for some things, I think that models can be helpful, right? Especially in an introductory class when they're trying to figure things out. So let's maybe do this. Can you give me an example of how you might approach number 1 if you were a student in this writing class? So this is a little bit too beautiful for me anyway, for something that like would be written in a notebook in 10 minutes or less. But I like the idea, right? And I could say to my students, you know, perhaps you want to focus your poem about that time that you went to go get coffee with your significant other, right? And, you know, it was sort of one of those moments where you realized that the two of you were no longer in the same space, right? Or you were no longer on the same page, right? So like maybe, and then maybe you could think about other moments, right, before the breakup, like other physical places that you went to or whatever, right, where you realized that things were starting to unravel or starting to come apart. So I wouldn't give them like this specific example, but I would perhaps use it as an example that I could like kind of describe to them about to help them get started. So I like to use AI for this sort of thing. I do this pretty often, especially if I'm looking for new ideas, at least, of things that I might be able to do with my students, especially if it's some sort of like informal writing prompt, or if I'm trying something new and I want more ideas. I like to use it for that as well. So I'm going to stop this because we're getting right to the end, and I want to make sure that we end on time. But does anybody have other ways in the last couple of minutes that you have used ChatGPT or other kinds of generative AI in your professional life, in your teaching life, or in your teaching life that you have found to be helpful, or that you wish that I had talked about instead of the examples that I chose to talk about? Because I can always keep in mind for future sessions.
You know, like a student learning and development course, I have an activity where students, they prompt ChatGPT to act as like a student with a problem that they're not forthcoming about. And then the student interviews the student to try and help them resolve their problem. It's mixed results. I would say sometimes it works really well, and then other times it's just a little bit, it falls flat. It depends. I think getting that prompt exactly right is key to making that as beneficial as possible.
Do you find, can I ask you a follow-up question?
Sure,
Do
yeah.
do you find that the AI is convincing as it acts as a student with a problem? Like, does it sound right?
That's the thing, like it's inconsistent. Sometimes it does, and then for like other students doing it at the exact same time, it's like not believable at all. And so that's the thing that I think I don't really understand, like I don't know enough to understand like about that consistency and how it is responding. And I know that like by like crafting the prompt in the right way, it could help to improve that, but it still doesn't seem like it's quite there yet.
Thank you very much. Does
Right.
anybody have any other ways that you've used ChatGPT or other kinds of generative AI in your teaching life or in your professional life that have been helpful?
What I have found is I have always tried to incorporate videos into my online and in-person classes. And generally speaking, what I'll do is have them watch a snippet of the video, kind of turn and talk. But I'm really trying to do more kind of active discussion and then some low stakes assessments. So what I've done is I take the transcript from the YouTube videos, enter those into ChatGPT, and ask it to come up with 2 or 3 questions based on the content of the video. And it does a pretty decent job. And then I'll put those into, I use Mentimeter in my classes so they can kind of use their phone. So they'll talk together about the video. I have prompts up there, and then they'll have to decide on what the response is to the prompt. So it's really low stakes, but it gets me a little bit more, it gives them more structure in terms of what they're supposed to be talking about. It gives me some sense of if they're getting it.
That's a great suggestion. Using it to kind of like create questions, either for them to answer, like written down, right, or for them to verbally answer. It could be a nice way to kind of like jump off and get started, and again, assess their understanding. Thank you. Oh, that's interesting, Kathy. Like asking it for hooks to get into topics in class. I like that. So ways to get started. Yeah. Does anybody else have any final comments or suggestions before we wrap up? Well, thank you all very much. And
Stephanie, I was just-
please, feel free if you'd like to have more conversations, don't hesitate to send me an email. I would be happy to talk more.
Thank you.
Thank you.